Morning, everyone. Welcome. My name is Raymond Paddock. I am the Environmental Program Manager for the Central Council Tlingit and Haida in Juneau, Alaska. I am Tlingit, and I am currently sitting as the Region 10 Tribal Chair for RTOC. I'm up here to introduce our keynote panel speakers, and we're honored to have them join us from all the way from DC and in Seattle at the Region 10 office. I'll start off by reading their bios and have them come up and join us. Again, thank you to the folks at the EPA for joining us. I'll start off by reading Kenneth Martin's bio. Kenneth is the new AEIO director. That's the American Indian Environmental Office. Originally from Wisconsin, Kenneth is an enrolled member of the Bad River Band of Lake Superior Chippewa Indians and was raised on the, my apologies if I mispronounce any of this, Menominee Indian Reservation, where he is a descendant. Before coming to the EPA, Kenneth served as Senior Policy Advisor to the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. First off, I want to apologize for doing this. I have bad eyes. My old people eyes have really kicked in. Next, Casey Sixkiller. Casey was appointed the Regional Administrator for EPA Region 10 by President Biden in 2022. He oversees the EPA's work to protect human health and the environment across Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Alaska, and 271 tribal nations. He's an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation. And last, Jane Nishida. Jane is the Assistant Administrator for the EPA's Office of International and Tribal Affairs. She leads EPA's international and tribal portfolios and is responsible for the full range of EPA's environmental program development and program implementation in tribal lands and in sovereign nations outside of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you to the EPA for joining us. Can you please come up?
Thank you. If I'm not mistaken, I'm the first one up. So thank you, Ray. And as Ray introduced me, I'm Jane Nishida. I am the Assistant Administrator for EPA's Office for International and Tribal Affairs. But I first want to begin by thanking the Shoshone-Bannock tribes for hosting us today and this week, and to also thank the Region 10 RTOC for inviting EPA, Kenneth and I and Casey to address you today. So thank you very much. So I listened intently to the theme of this year's conference, which is connecting. And so I'm going to try to connect with you in terms of my remarks. We heard from 3 speakers today about their perception of connecting, the importance of connecting land, air, and water, the importance of connecting not only the environment, but connecting the environment to our way of life and to our culture and our spirit. And certainly tribal nations and tribal communities know that full well. And then the other area that we talked about was connecting with one another. And that's where I would like to begin in terms of EPA. So EPA has obviously a very important role within the environment in terms of our mission to protect public health in the environment. But the more important role that we have that I want to address is that EPA, like other federal agencies, have a federal trust responsibility to our tribal nations. And that trust responsibility means that we need to work closely with you to ensure that protection in Indian country is at the same level as it might be throughout the United States. And I want to mention that President Biden on day 1, when he was first elected and came into office in January of 2021, he made our strengthening our nation-to-nation relationships, our trust responsibilities, and also strengthening our tribal consultation as priorities for the federal agencies. And he directed all the federal agencies, including EPA, to that charge. And so what I'd like to do today is just to highlight a few of the things that we have done at EPA to fulfill that charge that President Biden gave us on day one with regards to, again, strengthening our nation-to-nation relationship with tribal nations, fulfilling our federal trust responsibility to tribal nations, and also ensuring meaningful consultation with tribal nations. And then I'll go very briefly into some of EPA's tribal priorities, and then I'm going to turn to my colleague, Kenneth Martin, who is in charge of the American Indian Environmental Office, who will go into more details in terms of that mission. So as I mentioned, President Biden on day one issued a memorandum to the agencies. And one of the first charges that he had to us was that he wanted us to work with our tribal consultation policies. Some federal agencies, believe it or not, did not even have a tribal consultation policy. Fortunately for EPA, we were one of the first federal agencies that adopted a tribal consultation policy. But with the directive and with the commitment that we had, we have spent the last year and a half working with tribal nations in looking and reviewing our tribal consultation policy. What can we do to strengthen it to fulfill our commitments to tribal nations? And I know that yesterday in the RTOC meeting, we had an extensive conversation about some of the ways that we can strengthen it. I'm not going to go into those details, but I certainly are open to any questions that might follow. The other thing that President Biden did was he reestablished what was established under the the Obama presidency. And that was that he reestablished the White House Council for Native American Affairs. And what this council does is it works with tribal leadership and identifying tribal priorities and bringing the whole of the U.S. government, the federal agencies, to essentially respond and show how we can work together to meet the tribal needs and challenges that you have identified. So through the White House Council of Native American Affairs, just last week, under the leadership of Secretary Holland, she held a tribal engagement session about what the federal agencies were doing under the Inflation Reduction Act in terms of addressing the needs of tribal nations, particularly as it relates to climate adaptation and resilience. And in particular, she invited my boss, our boss, Administrator Regan, Secretary Granholm of the Department of Energy, and White House Senior Advisor John Podesta. And so we met with tribal leaders last week to talk again about what the agencies are doing with the IRA funds, the bill funds, to address the needs that you have. And one of the particular needs that was identified was capacity building. It's great that we have obviously additional resources through IRA, but how is the federal government going to help tribal nations build the capacity so they can more effectively and more productively use those federal resources? So we have established what we call technical assistance centers, and there's one specifically established for tribal nations to help with that, building that capacity. The other thing that the Tribal Council for Native Americans or Native Affairs, the White House Council, has done, again, through President Biden's leadership, they've identified the importance of tribal treaty rights. And I want to do a special shout out to the tribal leaders in Region 10, because it was under your leadership that you established and brought to the fore the issue of tribal treaty rights. So under the Obama administration, an MOU was created where 9 federal agencies signed on to recognize that federal agencies in our decision-making need to consider tribal treaty rights. under the Biden administration, they've expanded that MOU, and now 17 federal agencies have signed on to that MOU. And in addition, we have expanded it, recognizing that not all tribal nations have treaties, but all tribal nations have similar rights or reserved rights that the federal agencies need to protect. And so that MOU recognizes, again, that distinction that not all tribal nations have treaty rights, but you all have reserve rights and similar rights that the federal agency under our federal trust responsibility need to protect. And in addition, the White House Council has identified through the course of our work, the importance of protecting sacred sites as we develop, and the importance of incorporating indigenous knowledge. So these are additional areas that we are working with the White House and the other federal agencies to ensure that we are both, one, identifying that, and we also have training programs for the federal agencies so that the federal agencies who are working either directly or indirectly with tribal nations recognize these important priorities. And so in closing, I just want to mention the tribal priorities for EPA. There are 3 core responsibilities that particularly my office has. One is tribal consultation. The second is what we call direct implementation, and that is our responsibility as a federal trustee to ensure, as I mentioned, that the protection that we have in Indian country is as protective as it might be within the state. And so we have, again, direct implementation responsibilities as a federal trustee. And the third area is on capacity building. You are all familiar with our general assistance program that obviously supports tribal governments in terms of environmental capacity. And then the 2 other areas that I wanted to mention that are priorities for this administration is climate change. And as I mentioned, we talked about what we are doing on IRA and climate adaptation. We are doing webinars right now in terms of the particular needs of climate adaptation. I just wanted to, again, do a shout out to the RTOCs, because at a National Tribal Operations Committee meeting, I think it was last year or the year before last, these years trying to run, the RTOCs presented to the EPA leadership your particular challenges and needs when it comes to climate adaptation. So we are using the input that we received from the RTOCs to be able to try to address that. And then the final area is the issue of environmental justice or equity, and making sure that underserved communities have a seat at the table, that all communities are represented in terms of the work that we do at EPA. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kenneth.
Thank you, Jane. Bonjour, everyone. My name is Kenneth Martin. As Jane mentioned, I am the new director of the American Indian Environmental Office at EPA. I am I'm still within my 2nd month, so I'm pretty new, but I'm really happy to be where I'm at. First off, I want to thank, just like Jane, thank the Shoshone-Bannock tribes for hosting us. It's a delight to be here. I also want to thank all of the staff that have been working to put the conference together. I know these things aren't easy to do, so I want to thank all of them. And I want to thank all of the tribal leaders who are here in attendance. It's good to be back in person after having to do things virtually for so long. So it's good to connect in person and be able to have that face-to-face interaction. So thank you to all of you for making the journey. Before I begin, I hope you'll allow me a few minutes to share a little bit about my background, because I am still new to the position. But before joining the EPW, before joining EPA, I was actually at the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works for 6 years, working on environmental policy. Some of the things we talk about today, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the American Rescue Plan, were all things that I worked on when I was in the Senate working for EPW. So I'm very excited to be at EPA now after having written some of the language, having worked on some of that, now being on the other side at EPA to be able to implement that. Before that, I was at the United States Department of Transportation as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Tribal Government Affairs, where that position was actually created in 2005, but never filled until I took the job in 2015. And before that, I was at the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, and I worked for Senator Cantwell, who is chairwoman from Washington State, and Senator Tester, who was also a chairman of the committee from the state of Montana. So I've been on the Hill and in DC for a long time. I'm from a tribal community. I think that I have a very unique perspective, and I feel like right now my role at EPA couldn't be better. It's all coming together for me. So I'm very excited to be at EPA, especially with my background working on the Hill and working for the other agencies. As I mentioned, I've been on the ground for about 2 months. I'm still getting up to speed. There's a lot of things going on at EPA. Jane just mentioned a bunch of things that we're focusing on. I'll probably just touch on a couple of the things that she mentioned, just because I think they're so important. First and foremost is, I think, a top priority for me as director of the American Indian Environmental Office is ensuring that we are doing all that we can to honor our commitment to consultation and to tribal treaty rights. When I tell them, and I spoke earlier that I worked at the Department of Transportation, one of my first duties when I arrived there was to update the consultation policy under the Obama administration at USDOT. And at the time, I looked at EPA's consultation policy because it was perceived as the gold standard for consultation across all of the federal agencies. So I think that that's an important point to make going forward. So I'm really happy now to be working at EPA during a period while we are trying to improve on that consultation policy. We're looking forward to continuing those efforts. The last time it was updated was 2011, so it's been some time. In addition, EPA is also working on updating their tribal treaty rights guidance, which was developed in 2016. And both of these efforts, as Jane mentioned, were initiated by the Biden administration with the signing of the memo and direction of the executive order to work to ensure that the federal government was doing all it can to honor its treaty and trust responsibility. So those efforts are ongoing to update our tribal consultation policy. We've actually extended the consultation on the consultation policy until July 21st of this year. So we're hoping that anyone who has any comments, there was a good discussion yesterday, as Jane mentioned, and I know that some tribes are putting together their comments on that consultation policy. So, any efforts to get those comments into us by July 21st would be best, and we are much appreciated. So we look forward to receiving those comments, and then once we have them, we'll take them and we'll review what we have. So we'll look forward to that. Another thing that Jane mentioned was our commitment to capacity building. Over all of my years working with tribal governments, one of the first things I hear about is capacity building and resources to help tribes build capacity and have technical assistance. As Jane mentioned, recently the Biden administration, the EPA announced that they were establishing 17 new technical assistance centers. They're called Thriving Community Technical Assistance Centers, which we're referring to as TICTACs. 3 of them are national and 14 of them are going to be in the region. Region 10 specifically has 2 of these technical assistance centers. But more importantly, as Jane mentioned, there's one national technical assistance center, TICTAC, that's the National Indian Health Board. And the goal of this TICTAC is to focus solely on the needs of Indian country and help tribes and tribal programs navigate EPA's grant programs and other programs. So it's to help them just adapt and figure out what resources are actually available to them. And so we're hoping this is a long-term effort. Obviously, capacity building and technical assistance are critically needed to ensure that we're getting resources to all of the communities that most definitely need it. So we're looking forward to that. We're working with the National Indian Health Board, the NIHB. That Technical Assistance Center will hopefully be online by the end of the summer. So tribes will be able to access those resources there. So they have that technical assistance capacity. And I've worked with the National Indian Health Board for a long time, so very much looking forward to seeing what they can do there. I have a lot of other things I think I could share with you, but I think those are some of the highlights. As I said, there's a lot of priorities that we're identifying, that I'm identifying in my new role. There's a lot of work to be done. I'm looking forward to continuing our partnership together and getting some of the things done that we need to get done. I'm incredibly happy to be at the EPA. And looking forward to this next couple of years as we go forward. But I think I'll conclude my remarks there. I know we have a discussion right after this about some of the things we're working on, so I'll save some of that conversation for after this. But that allows me the opportunity to introduce my good friend, the Region 10 Administrator for EPA, Casey Zixkeller.
Well, OCO, good morning, everyone. All right, there we go. Make sure everyone's still awake in here. Hey, I want to start first, just like as Jane and Kenneth have, by thanking the Shoshone-Bannock tribes for hosting us today, for the very warm welcome, for the extremely large portions in the restaurant down the hall. I'll have to get my suits adjusted when I get back to Seattle, but I'm delighted to be here today in person to join all of you, and of course for all of those that are beaming in to the sessions over the next few days. Thank you for joining us as well. I want to thank Chairman Small. I see him kind of coming in and out of the room, and all the members of the Business Council for being here. EPA has worked really closely with many of you over the years, and I'm so thankful that you're able to join us here as well today. And I want to congratulate Chairman Small on his upcoming and well-deserved retirement. Although it sounds like Kelly's going to put him to work here pretty soon. So, but I'm excited for Chairman Small. And I will say that in my time at the EPA, my interactions with Chairman Small have always left me with more questions for my team and really a grounding in the work that we do and the partnership that we have with tribes. So I'm very thankful, and I'm going to miss Chairman Small. I also want to give a special thank you to Councilmember Lewan Tyler. Not only for being just the warmest and funniest guy there is, but also just a staunch advocate, not just for this tribe and as a voice on the RTOC and the NTOC and really every room he comes into. He is a champion for the environment and tribal sovereignty. And so thank you, Lewan, for all that you do. I want to thank Kelly Wright as well. We've heard from Kelly a couple times today. You're going to continue to hear from Kelly over the next few days. But I have to tell you, I have learned so much from Kelly just in my time being in this role. And I'm so thankful for all the years that you've given to this tribe and to Indian country. For those of you that are on the fence about whether to go see the gay mine, I hope that you will join Kelly on that trip, because it really does give you a sense of what this community is facing, but also just some of the big questions that we're all grappling with as we continue to embrace our green energy transition and some of the challenges that we have going forward. So thank you, Kelly. Speaking of the RTOC, I want to give a big round of applause to not just our RTOC members, but our RTOC staff who've worked so hard to put on our meeting yesterday and TELS today. I want to thank Administrator Nishida and Director Martin for joining us here today as well. We could not have two better partners for me and all of us at EPA and for Region 10 back in the other Washington than these two. And it is pretty cool. Kenneth and I have known each other for a little over 20 years. And it's pretty amazing to think about where we are today and the work now, the good trouble we get to be part of at our time at the EPA. Finally, not finally, but I do want to highlight, that for the 271 tribes in Region 10, TELS is a big deal. This is a big production for our staffs. but it's also a huge opportunity for us to come together as one community and share ideas, share concerns, talk about solutions, as Chairman Small said. But really, I think to remember that we're not in this alone, right? We get up every day to fight for what is most important to us. And, you know, sometimes it feels like that boulder we're pushing up the hill rolls over us a little bit throughout the day. But but really, we are all in this together. And I'm really thankful for that and the opportunity to be part of it. Since this is my first TELS, I thought I would give a little bit of introduction about myself. Again, I'm Casey Sixkiller. I'm the EPA Regional Administrator for Region 10 in Seattle. I am an enrolled citizen of Cherokee Nation. I grew up in Seattle, but my family's still in Oklahoma. I have a new Choctaw brother down here in the front row. I'm also the first Indigenous person to have this job, which is pretty exciting. You know, and I think it really just is a reflection, as Jane and Kenneth and others have commented, is a reflection of President Biden's commitment to the work that we do in Indian country. And so I feel very honored to be in this role. And I think it also hopefully is somewhat reassuring to all of the Native folks in this room today and joining us online that, you know, the perspective that I bring to the decisions that we make in the region, to the rules that we're working to implement, to the grants that we're granting out, and really just to the way that we're engaging generally with our tribal partners in Indian country. Because I can't think of a more consequential time in advancing EPA's mission to protect human health in the environment than right now. But it's a great challenge and opportunity, but it also means that we need to work together to make the impact and sustain progress going forward. I'm going to skip ahead since we're behind. But working together nation to nation is a huge priority of mine and certainly for my entire team. I will say one of the things that I've been so impressed by in the Region 10 employees, some of whom are here today as well, is, you know, our work in Indian country is not something that we do on the side. It is embedded in the DNA of what we do every day in Region 10. And, you know, I don't know how it works in the other regions, but in Region 10, at least, to a person, every one of our members of our team, when we have over 650 employees spread across 4 states, they know that an integral part of their job is working with our tribal partners and to protect Indian country. So I'm very thankful for that. I did want to add just a couple of highlights for Region 10 as I reflect on the theme of connecting to protect the sacredness of place and being. This is a generational opportunity for us between the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act, President Biden's leadership, Administrator Regan's leadership. And so, one of the things that Administrator Regan often asks us when we're together is, with all of this opportunity, if not now, when? When are we going to move the ball downfield? And so I think right now we have all the tools we need to advance the protection and restoration of treaty rights, help meet the challenges of climate change, integrate environmental justice into our work, and bring forward a new generation of environmental stewards and leaders. That, I think, is the greatest opportunity we have, is to bring young people along in our work so they can continue that journey and that work for all of us. We've had some big highlights over the last year. I'm just going to tick off a couple of them as I see my friend Gayla here in the front row. Earlier this year, we took historic action that was a long time in the making. 13 years ago, tribes, native villages, native corporations, alongside with fishing and environmental organizations, petitioned Region 10 to use our Clean Water Act Section 404C authority to help protect Bristol Bay's salmon resources. On January 30th of this year, EPA issued a Clean Water Act Section 404C final determination for the Pebble Deposit area that helps protect certain ecologically important waters that are vital to sustaining Bristol Bay's salmon resources. And just a few weeks ago, Gayla and I and many others, Alaska Natives, were able to join President Biden in the Rose Garden of the White House to celebrate this decision. And I have to tell you, the best part of the whole experience was seeing these young Alaska Natives there not just at the White House, but to celebrate a really important moment for them, for their communities, for their culture, for the salmon. I couldn't be more proud to have been part of that. So thank you, Gayla, for everybody for your determination throughout that process. We've talked a little bit about our EJ work, so I won't go into that here. Just to know there's a lot of resources that are coming, many billions of dollars worth of grant opportunities over the next several months. So we'll be working with the RTOC and tribal leaders throughout Region 10 to make sure that you're aware of those things and utilizing these technical assistance centers that Kenneth and Jane have both mentioned. Back on in Washington State, we are moving 1,000 miles an hour, as my friend Russ knows, on working to clean up Puget Sound. But also just down the road here along the Columbia River, both our Puget Sound and Columbia River geographic programs now have historic levels of funding and the opportunity for us to make real progress in a whole range of issues in restoration efforts and policy advancements, and doing that in partnership and really centering our work on the treaties that require us to do that. So I'm really excited about that. And yeah, the numbers really are mind-boggling to think about where we are. We now, just one of our new opportunities includes $30 million over 4 years to be matched dollar for dollar with state funding for water quality improvements to support salmon and treaty rights. So we're cutting new territory here with our Puget Sound program and our Columbia River Basin Restoration Program. It's very exciting. One of the things I'm sure you'll hear more about over the next couple of days is about 6 PPD. I want to highlight EPA's leadership on that urgent issue of 6 PPD or 6 PPDQ from tire dust and its impacts coming from transportation and on water quality. For many years, the EPA has been partnering and funding the core work of identifying alternatives, but also the impacts of this. It is a salmon killing toxic that we're continuing to learn more about. But it also, the way in which we've done this has really been partnership based, not just with EPA, other federal agencies, the states, tribes, and others, to understand the impact, what this toxic chemical is, start thinking about what an alternative is in your tires that goes into stormwater runoff and goes into our rivers and estuaries and is lethal for coho salmon in particular. We at the EPA have stood up a national work group across all of our national programs. That sounds like inside baseball, but it's a big deal. And so later this month, we'll be able to report out, what our plan going forward is and get feedback on that and make sure that we are, not waiting the next 10, 15, 20 years to understand all of the range of solutions, but to start start advancing solutions now on the ground. One of the ways we've done that in Region 10 is I've asked our permitting folks, as we are looking at NPDES permits in particular, is to start thinking about 6 PPD. And so we had just issued a permit recently to Joint Base Lewis McChord, which is in Washington State, where we've included 6 PPDQ as an issue that they need to be able to manage going forward. Our lab is developing testing standards, and so we are really leaning in, and I'm excited about that work. Yesterday, we shared with the RTOC the launch of our new $20 million program in Alaska to deal with Alaska contaminated lands. These are lands that were formerly federal properties that were conveyed to Alaska Native communities under the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. They were knowingly contaminated at the time of conveyance. And so we're very thankful for resources that Congress has given us to stand up a new $20 million program to actually start to make meaningful progress on empowering tribal communities in Alaska to better understand what the level of contamination is in their communities and to come up with a plan for getting those materials out of their communities. Brownfields, on the brownfield side, the bipartisan infrastructure law included historic $1.5 billion investment for brownfields. Of that, $300 million was allocated over the next 5 years for state and tribal response planning funding. As you know, tribes are big recipients of this work. In Region 10 tribes and tribal consortia received $5.2 million in brownfields grants, which we announced just a couple of weeks ago. Two things I do want to mention here as I close out, and I know I'm bumping up against my time, is I know you're going to talk a little bit more over the next couple of days about treatment as a sovereign, TAS, under the Clean Water Act. And I just want to emphasize, in March, I had the chance to go down to the Squaxin Island tribe, who is the newest tribe to get TAS in Region 10. This is a big commitment. It is a big commitment by tribes to go through the TAS process. And one of the things I really wanted to emphasize to Squaxin Island was a thanks to their tribal councils for setting aside the resources and the money for that tribe to actually go through this process, to have the ability to set its own water quality standards. I'm really proud of the fact that we have so many tribes in Region 10 who have gone through the TAS process. But I'm hoping that as you continue to learn more about it, that those are things that perhaps your tribes will consider doing as well. Finally, I want to talk about GAP, which is the funding I know that brought many of you here today or helping you attend virtually. The longer I'm in this job, the more I know how important GAP funding is. It's been a key aspect of our environmental program across the region. The sheer size of the R10 GAP network today is over 600 environmental directors, coordinators, assistants, technicians, and we're adding more every year. GAP funding helps tribes develop environmental protection programs and make informed decisions that impact the health of tribal members in the environment. GAP grants have helped tribes in Alaska and the Pacific Northwest plan for climate change, monitor air and water quality, develop solid waste management plans, engage local communities on environmental issues, and so much more. I'm impressed not only by the scope of the GAP network, but also by how much has been accomplished from a relatively modest pot of money, overcoming some serious logistical challenges, especially in rural Alaska. That's why I have directed one-time increases in FY24 GAP budgets to both tribes and intertribal consortia who come in for GAP grants alone, and those who apply for GAP grants as part of a performance partnership agreement. I know how much increased GAP funding means for tribes, and we will continue to work with Congress and with headquarters to increase funding for that program. But the opportunities that GAP unlocks for tribes is second to none. So being able to utilize these resources and push them out where we know the need is, I think now is the time for us to do that. So again, so that we can leverage the historic moment we find ourselves in. With that, I want to thank you all so much for being here, for giving us a few minutes to share some of what's going on at the EPA. As Kenneth said, we could go on and on. But with that, I think we'll transition to our panel discussion. Aaron?